Bernard de Montreal. Book Beyond the Mind. Chapter 18. The Interdimensional I and You. Throughout involution, the pronominal function of the I and You became gradually extroverted, leading to the development of an increasingly self-centered consciousness. A proportional deterioration of the psychic link with the cosmic intelligence of the thought adjuster or higher self followed as a result. The consequence for mankind was the growing alienation of man as well as an increasing ignorance of the laws of life, death and immortality, and millenniums of human suffering. We lost contact with the source of thought, forfeited our right to know and understand our progressive evolutionary past as well as the clairvoyance into our own destiny. The unconscious I created in the ego a mirror image that reduced the status of the cosmic self to egocentric proportions. Gradually, self-perception became limited to the physical senses, oblivious of interdimensional, unified being reality. Evolution towards conscious intelligence leads to a re-evaluation of the internal dynamics of the thought process. This new awareness brings into mental focus the adversarial relationship that exists subliminally in the unconscious mind between the mental forces of intelligence and the astral forces of the soul, giving birth to an individualized psychology of being, and a cosmological rather than a psychological definition of the self. The introverted function of the I and You is then restored alongside the extroverted one. The self is more than an egocentric perception of the within the field of subjective consciousness. It is a relational link with the mental planes of universal network intelligence. The pronominal function of the I and You must be interiorized for the ego to engage in telepathic communication with the thought adjuster from whom an absolute knowledge of life and evolution is available. This new consciousness requires that the ego reach beyond the psychological status quo of involutionary experience, to plunge freely into the study of the yet unknown territory of evolutionary mind dynamics. When it addresses itself internally to an invisible entity such as the higher self through the use of the pronominal you, it receives an answer which it tends, at first, to doubt as objective reality. It has lost touch with its inner ground for so long. It finds it difficult, if not impossible or irrational, to share its lower self-experience with a cosmic partner. Fearing its own dissolution prevents it from acceding to a system of thought communication that could free it from a fictitious psychological identity. As the science of the mind is experienced from a point of view that is free of the psychological dynamics of the unconscious ego, and thrust into the forefront of the psychic study of the interdimensional I and You, the lower self will increase his psychic territory and gain in creative experience as well as knowledge. Involutionary art expresses the dissimulated frustration and struggle of the unconscious self in his search for real identity through the euphoric, submental symbolism of the art form, an avocation of the soul that has little in common with the interdimensional identity of the self. The astral or unconscious artist can easily change psychological identities to express different facets of the lower self in his quest for expression. But real identity is ever elusive. The involutionary artist, equipped only with the unconscious pronominal forms, lacks the inner science to connect to his real and higher self. Astral art is a delight to the lower self. Conscious or mental art is inspired from the higher self, and is a channel for the dictation of the conscious science of art, instead of being simply a lower form of self-expression, a cultural artifact of relative value. The mental artist has little need for unconscious expression and directs his creative exploration toward the exploration of higher consciousness through his art, rather than simply entertaining a fictitious role, in part to quell the domineering impulses of the soul, and in part for the recognition of his peers. Art in its astral form belongs to our kind of civilization. We still need its contention that there is more to reality than appears at first sight. In fact, we need art because we lack the consciousness of our real self and our cosmic dimension. We cannot communicate with reality, so we communicate through the submental symbolism of art. It takes more than art, science, or religion to discover the laws of conscious thought. As civilization turns its back on tradition, people turn to modern entertainment, a distracting astral art experience. Sportsmania is becoming a secular ritual whose art form is measured in terms of performance. Much of modern music no longer offers solace to the soul, but poisons the spirit whose inner voice is shut out, while other more astral voices fight their way into the unwary minds of young people seeking relief from a world they do not understand. Violence is turning into an art form, and the fragmented self identifies with it in the name of psychological survival, an euphemism for the lack of real identity. The restless search for some form of identity within an ever-present swirl of art entertainment testifies to the growing emptiness of modern existence. Identity is sought after in such panic that failure lures many towards the drug experience, already integrated into the art forms of a mega-civilization too complex and dehumanized to understand or identify with. Since the death of the more cautious, institutionalized symbolism, insufficient to nourish the basic needs of a civilization too sophisticated to return to the past. The pain of loneliness is soothed by the Walkman. Millions seek not to walk alone in a world devoid of sense and order. The cinema creates heroes to emulate. Since the screen's latest submental symbols are part of an art form that can be duplicated on an individual basis, in the form of violence or eroticism. Mood-chilling movies project and duplicate astral and even satanic symbolism, tuning the psyche into forces that point the way to death through blood-curdling pleasures and controlled fear. Religions turn their forums into artistic crowd management, and magnetize the astral spiritual feelings of unconscious, naive egos, cutting them off from their mind source. Hypnotic mantras replace the submental symbols of another age. The ultimate trick of astral religion on human intelligence. Television becomes a psychiatrist's couch. The problems of the nation analyzed, rationalized, and reflected upon until a psychosis spreads its cold sheet over the minds of millions. Distressed individuals are emotionally infected by the public disclosure of a civilization doomed to degradation by astral artistry and frenzied competition in the powerful medium of the entertainment industry. When this type of art form becomes meaningless to the individualized consciousness, its civilization becomes a museum, and only the individual can change himself. The interiorization of the pronominal I and you creates a new consciousness, allowing the lower self to experience mental intimacy with his source. The spiritual legacy of a civilization dries up when the mosaic of its submental symbolism disintegrates. The individual must then learn to explore his psychic territory alone, burdened though he is by ancient memories. The insularity of the mind must be developed and the self brought into contact with the inner dimensions of his psychic reality that cannot be unlocked through symbolism. Civilization has its cycles, and when it can no longer help him penetrate the inner sanctum of a psyche seeped in formalism, he must do it alone, fearless, with inner strength. Communication with interdimensional intelligence is the beginning of man's reconnection to his source. Contact alone will not suffice until the astral link with involutionary thought systems has been broken. Astral memory placates consciousness because the unconscious mind is connected to the past, and its symbolism and reality remain unknown. Before his astrality has been transmuted, the multidimensional nature of man and the universe prevents him from becoming easily conversant with the mental planes that are the foundation of his personal reality. Evolution will bring to bear upon the self the notion of a pre-personal intelligence, acting as a guiding principle in human development. This will come about through the raising of the pronominal values of the I and you in the psychological and psychic structure of egocentric consciousness. The self will learn that inner contact extends beyond the astral spiritual experience. It is part of a communications network with other planes of universe intelligence that are symbolically referred to as the higher self, the ambiguous addendum to spiritual reality. The higher self is an independent intelligence source in intermittent contact with the unconscious ego through subliminal thought, too low in vibration to catch the attention of the lower self. Its interdimensional role stays hidden in the gray reflective zones of consciousness, and its creative role is the last stumbling block to unraveling the mystery of consciousness. Knowledge of the thought adjuster, or higher self, is the beginning of a series of objective cosmological explanations that will bring about evolutionary advancement. The objectivity of the inner I and you will become a fact of conscious mental life, and lead to the materialization of the invisible portion of the planetary I. This materialization will create a new opening in the Earth's etheric field and alter the planet's consciousness, introducing the Earth to other space civilizations, held back from open contact with humanity until this central cosmic event takes place. The inner eye of unconscious man is but a reflection of his cosmic eye. It is dissociated from universe reality through the egoic mirror image that the thought process creates in the lower self. The new man will become conscious of this, and attain a level of mental vibration allowing him to interface freely with other intelligences without falling under the hypnotic spell of their highly vibrant mental energy, thus avoiding the involutionary repetition of the formation of religions or cults. The new evolutionary cycle will be different from the involutionary one, in that the conscious self will achieve full being status in the local system. Such status does not as yet exist, even though humanity has achieved a high level of technical development that remains comparatively primitive from a systemic standpoint, those worlds having long ago broken the light barrier, and therefore the death barrier. Once the inner I and you have been brought within the field of awareness, the new man and his institutions will be free, in an open contact with other intelligences whose encounter will have been cleared by interdimensional systemic government. The inner laws of thought are occult, and cannot be apprehended through the intellectual process of a race that has lost touch with its origins. The mind must be freed before contact with other planets, that are the cradle of the human race, can be fully initiated. Conscious integration of the interdimensional I and you will grow throughout the new evolutionary cycle, bringing man closer than he has ever been to the dissolution of the karmic law of death. These changes will be of an order that will affect the very foundation of civilization as we know it. Interdimensional knowledge is not accessible to materialistic sciences and mass religions. It can only follow a revolution of intelligence based on inner communication with the mental planes. This fact is an unalterable part of human destiny and its contact with the spheres. Submental symbolism rooted in pluralistic and diversified cultural backgrounds will finally be put to rest. As the psychic connection is established with more advanced soul evolution and psychic perception, inner growth and development will proceed at a pace never achieved in the involutionary phase of civilization. The higher mental human psyche is sufficiently developed to absorb new knowledge. Man is ready to know. What had already imprinted itself on his mind will be wiped clean through a personal phase of inner transformation that prepares the lower self for psychic contact with the mental planes. The ego will no longer interfere with the mental registers of thought communication. A new man will be ready to meet with his parent race, no longer subject to the memory blackout of his close encounter. It is important to know that mankind is polarized, because it responds to different thought systems. Thought is a communication phenomena in the systemic universe that is ruled by absolute powers that incarnate the very nature of knowledge and scientific achievement. The I and you relationship is part of a masking operation from the highest levels of universal governments until man has reached sufficient inner maturity to comprehend the cosmic dimension of life and thought. The evolution of intelligence begins at this point and spreads in the universe to reach levels of perfection unimaginable by human standards. Life is a branching out process that started on other planets and materialized on Earth in order to form a new link, allowing universal governments to interpenetrate the consciousness of new life forms, man being the latest and most primitive adaptation. An objective mental network absorbs the I and you pronominal duality only when conscious dialogue with the thought adjuster becomes a unified field of thought communication. This is where inner thought displaces reflective thought and raises it to an objective level of telepathic communication that reinforces the link with an intelligence source independent of the ego but integrated with its psychological duality. Then inner thought will be converted into inner communication. The new man will realize that thinking is a process that does not come from him but to him. It will be fully understood for the first time that thoughts originate from the highest mental planes and lose their light as they are adjusted to the psychological parameters of the unconscious reflective ego, maintaining the karmic illusion of free will. This illusion is broken once the lower self has achieved full psychic maturity. Independent of the psychological components accumulated through long immersion in the cultural conditioning of his race memory. The inner I and you are part of a bilateral system of communication that enables the thought adjuster to instruct the ego in the science of life, while enabling the self to freely communicate with a plane of intelligence that can only unveil its living knowledge according to the degree of soul evolution. The soul must be tested to be freed of its basic karmic fears before it can benefit without psychological and psychic upheaval from the multidimensional power of the self's reality. The soul must be made to feel and see this outer dimension while incarnated in a physical envelope that sensorially limits its psychic nature, as it compels the unconscious self to live in accordance with life designs that are not part of its cosmic destiny. The soul must learn how to deal with forces that engender an energy that the lower self at the ego level tends to perceive subjectively. It must also acquire a psychic maturity sufficiently advanced to deal with two levels of reality at once, its own and that of the thought adjuster. Mental life borders a yet unrecognized pre-personal dimension, and a personal one created and reinforced by subjective thinking throughout the formative stages of the unconscious self. As inner maturity sets in, the new man will gradually understand the difference between thinking and communicating. He will realize the illusion of self-thought and the existence of his communications network with objective intelligence, screened by his reflective evaluation associated with the inner I and you, in a culture whose thinking habits were formed and imposed on an unsuspecting, unconscious self. The inner voice does not always come from the thought adjuster. It may well originate from guides or entities on lower or higher astral planes, in vibrational sympathy with man's psychic apparatus. Thoughts are either astral or mental in origin. The more unconscious the mind, the more polluted it becomes, and the more astral and subjective the thoughts. Man was not created to communicate with the astral planes but with the mental planes. Astral communication created a perversion within the universal thought systems of human consciousness, and retarded the individualization of the self. Man was tricked into the astral thought network because of his unconscious link with the dead, who think like the living with the exception that they evolve in astral rather than physical form. He has paid dearly for his naivety that has kept him chained to the involutionary cycle of mechanical intelligence development. As a result, the unconscious mind has gradually polluted itself to a point where man today, whether in contact with low or high astral entities, can never achieve fully integrated self-identity, or fusion. unless he is in contact with the thought adjuster on the mental plane. Fusion can only take place if the soul is incarnated in the physical body. Astral entities, regardless of their spiritual status, cannot bring man to full cosmic consciousness. Psychics are usually conscious of astral communication, and develop their faculties through personal engagement and refinement of their astral network and its components. Their sensitivity to astral energy is the source of their faculties. Most are unaware that such contact spiritualizes their mental energy, marginalizes their intelligence, and makes them subservient to entities or souls that are free of the physical envelope, but just as ignorant of the cosmic laws of evolution that underlie the development of human intelligence, whose level they cannot achieve in astral form. Psychics have the spiritually naive tendency to believe their astral contact, and consequently retard their fusion with the thought adjuster, the astral network, thereby remaining the only communication system they experience. They fail to see the astral game and its laws, and so fall prey to esoteric or occult belief systems that retard their fusion with the higher self. They often confuse their own higher self with a spirit guide. This fatally leads to the ultimate spiritual illusion. The worst examples of astral interference with human intelligence are witnessed with insane or psychically disturbed individuals who receive messages from low astral planes that compel them to act out their psychotic behavior. Advanced possession such as this carries little occult meaning to classical psychology or psychiatry. The pharmacopoeia used in the treatment of those patients has the ability to temporarily break of the psychic current. However, it cannot bring back the sick to a conscious state, and it can destroy what little mental clarity and will to fight is left to the patient already being dispossessed of his psychic space. Individuals who talk to themselves, or engage in profound inner communication of a distorted nature, experience the astralization of the I and you relationship, dangerously letting themselves be influenced by an entity that seeks the gradual destruction of the invalid's identity so it may easily subdue his will to take over the personality. When undertaking to test the validity of the I and you relationship, one must never submit to inner control. This ensures contact with a mental, rather than an astral source that would otherwise seek such control. The weakness and lack of intelligence of the astral world lies in the imposition of their will over man. This is the ultimate test that exposes the astral source of inner contact. Souls are not thought adjusters. The former are from death, the latter from light. souls make mistakes where thought adjusters do not, and souls are far from perfect. But thought adjusters are. The new man will develop a supramental intelligence that will hook his mind into the highest possible thought register available at this stage of human evolution. He will be privy to an advanced inner communications network that will totally alter his personality and individualize his self, giving him access to ever more supraliminal planes of conscious thought that will ensure his freedom from astral programming. Supramental intelligence will unify his mind with the pre-personality of his thought adjuster, who has followed his development as a planetary being since the first descent of his soul into the physical body. Not all souls come from Earth. Many come from other parts of the systemic universe. The I and you relationship will induce interdimensional consciousness and re-establish the link with the invisible but mentally present thought adjuster, enabling the new man to encounter the physical creators of his race. The danger of being psychically and psychologically overpowered will have been arrested. He will bring his own experience to others of faraway places. No longer will he be regarded as a creature, having reached a stage of full development in his own right. The I and you relationship or dialogue will have ascertained his glorious and independent future. The new man will not deal with the astral plane, but communicate directly with the mental worlds, the cosmic source of creative intelligence. The I and you relationship will be developed to a degree that will balance the psychic forces that penetrate the mental plane, and that the ego needs in order to create at its own level and for its own well-being. A full equilibrium will exist between the I and the you, until they perfectly harmonize to become indivisible through the fusion of soul and spirit.